Welcome to the Catholic Theology Show, presented by Ave Maria University. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Dauphinais. And today, I'm joined by Louis Brown Jr., who's Executive Director of the Christ Medicus Foundation. Very pleased to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here with you.
Well, so glad you're here.
Thanks.
I wanted to begin with just a big question about religious liberty. Maybe we could just put it provocatively.
Sure.
Right? Why is there religious liberty?
Sure.
Why should religions have any more liberty than just every other person in a country?
Right. No, it's an interesting question. There's religious liberty because religious liberty protects the freedom to the highest good, which is love. And It protects that freedom, I think, more profoundly than perhaps any other right that we have. It protects the highest good, which is love, and helps us to understand human dignity. It helps us to, it gives us a freedom to experience the reality of human dignity and the sanctity of life for every person. So I think that religious liberty, they call it the first liberty in the Constitution, the First Amendment. That's articulated in the First Amendment, and I think it is, along with the right to life and right of conscience, our most important foundational bedrock civil rights and our human rights.
Wow, that's so well put. It's really maybe the freedom to love and to learn about a higher source of love.
That's right.
In part, it seems in a way, I think there's a crisis of maybe individualism where we tend to think that individuals exist in a society and they have the right to be individuals, right? And the society has the right to control the individuals. But I think today we often have a suspicion that individuals have kind of a natural right to form communities. The community maybe of the family or also the community of churches. So the community of people coming together as a family or as a church is in many ways really prior to the state.
Oh, 100%. 100%. It's a very challenging issue because across our cultural spectrum, you have this recognition of rights, but I think both on various polls that we're going through, you have folks saying that I have absolute autonomy. And some are saying, well, I have absolute autonomy, regardless of what direction I'm going into, whether it's towards order, towards love, towards human flourishing, or towards disorder and human destruction, that I can exercise my autonomy however I want, whether it's over my body or over my money.
Okay.
And so I think that those are very misguided ways of understanding things in terms of this absolute autonomy that leads to thoughts that have almost exclusively to do with power. So no, I mean, I think your earlier question, your earlier kind of supposition, which is that on some level, the community exists, not on some level, but absolutely the community exists before the government, and before the community exists God. And so there's a proper ordering. The state has legitimate authority, but there are things that are up over and above the state, such as God and the community.
Wow. Now, you're going to be speaking to Ave Maria University faculty, staff, and
Hopefully,
students.
if I get there in like 2.5 hours.
That's right, later this afternoon. What are some kind of big themes that you want to communicate today?
Sure. I think for me, the biggest theme that I'm trying to communicate is that really three things. The first is the priority for all people, but particularly young people, to encounter the living God, to encounter love himself in an ongoing daily way.
Yeah.
And to steep for folks at Ave Maria University, for parents, for everybody, for every American, every child, every man, woman, and child, to encounter Christ, to encounter love. That is the whole point of life, that you can, and I say this, hopefully I'll say this a little later today, you can save the world 100 times over, But if one does not come to know and persevere in Christ on a certain level, particularly for those of us who've been given the gift of being aware in Christ, if we fail to persevere in Christ, we can save the world 100 times over, but our lives will be a failure. So to steep our identity in being sons and daughters of God, I talked to a group of law students and college interns a couple months ago, and they all had this concern, or at least one of them had this concern that there's this lie in the culture that you have to merit your dignity. That you have to merit your dignity.
Oh, okay.
And so that therefore my dignity is what I do. My dignity is how much value I produce and within the culture, within the economy, et cetera. And that's a lie. That's an objectification of the person.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want everyone that I talk to know that they are loved and that they can rest in the safety and security. Dr. Bob Schuetz talks about this, in the safety and security of just being a son and daughter of God. And so that healing encounter with Christ, that healing touch of Christ, that helps us to know who we are. And then it helps us to know what we do, what we're called to do, which is through our vocation is to love other people, whatever role that takes, whether it's being an engineer or being a priest or being a religious sister or being a doctor or being a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad, whatever that may be, to encounter Christ, to be healed and to go out and to heal others. There's a massive attack on religious freedom. And ultimately that attack is in our freedom to go out and love and heal others. And then we have to fight against that.
Mm-hmm. So if we have that if we discover our dignity as children of God,
right,
loved by the creator of the universe,
right, exactly.
Right. So we're not alone. It's really natural then to go out and love our neighbor. Right. Right. In some ways, this is the key, right? Commandments are to love God and love our neighbors ourselves. Right. And so in a way, religious liberty, as I hear you describing it, I never quite thought about it like this. It's really our ability then to go out and love one another.
Right, that's right. At its highest form.
And to love one another in not only as individuals, but as members of a community.
That's right.
And to a certain extent, do it in just on our authentic name, which is right. If we're doing that because we've discovered, right, a power greater than ourselves, right. If we've discovered the creator of the universe, if we've discovered perhaps that the creator of the universe loves us and his son, then it's also appropriate that we would do it not in our own name because it's not really our own strength. It's not our own love. So it's appropriate that we would do it in God's name. Right.
Yeah. And that it's not a private exercise, that it's very much it's a public exercise, there's a private dimension to it, but that our faith is intended to, it's right and it's just for us to proclaim Christ, to exercise our faith in the public square, and to get away from this kind of very kind of Protestant notion that I think became popular, though I was not here, but in the middle of the 20th century, particularly in the Northeast, that your faith is this private affair that you put in the back, in the back door, in the back room, and you don't discuss, you're almost ashamed of it. But it's the path, our faith is the path to a flourishing civil society. But it's more than that. It's also the whole reason why we're here. And, I think, I'll stop there.
Okay. No, I think it's very, and in some ways I do think actually you can even trace that back to some thinkers earlier in political, kind of early modern political theory who would make a distinction between religious conduct, which is totally under the control of the state, and then religious belief, which is private and internal.
Sure.
And, and in some ways, I think that's ironically what we still have today. No longer in the name of established religions, but the idea that, and I don't know if your experience, because you've worked in this area, but where the government often feels sometimes as though its duty to control conduct, and in exercised by religious people.
Right. Yeah. And on a certain level, it divides the person. So you see this very powerfully. If a person's a true believer and you say that we're going to cut off your belief from your activity, then how can you survive on a certain level? How can you authentically survive as the person you're called to be?
Yes. Yeah, so that's very well put. Very well put. So you said that was kind of the first thing, is that we're loved by God. The second thing is that we have a duty, therefore, to love others. Was there
right?
more?
Yeah, and I think that love is healing. We talk about a lot about this at Christ Medicus. The Catholic healthcare, which is in the aggregate the largest deliverer of healthcare in the United States. It provides around somewhere between 15 and 17, give or take a couple percent, of all American healthcare deliveries from a Catholic healthcare institution. And Catholic healthcare in the United States globally was founded by Jesus Christ. Catholic healthcare is the healing ministry of Christ that he instituted when he was walking in the Holy Land and curing the sick, delivering those that were demonically afflicted, and liberating people from the lives and the traumas that they had experienced. And so that's the mission of Catholic healthcare. That's vitally important. Right now, in America and other parts of the world, our mandate, our baptismal commission to make disciples of all nations, to be instruments of God's love and healing for others, is being attacked. Most of popular culture doesn't necessarily reflect what the majority opinion, but the drivers of popular culture, I think, largely wanted to eradicate the gospel and Catholic evangelization from society altogether, which means we don't want Catholics faithfully practicing in medicine. We don't want Catholics faithfully practicing mental health. We don't want Catholics in the field of bioethics and in scientific research. We don't want you. Now, if you're going to make an accommodation with the world and you're going to leave your faith behind, if you're functionally going to, to reject Christ for the world, then we want you. And if you want to be a Catholic in name only, that's fine. But otherwise, if you're going to bring your faith into your public conduct that has public repercussions, we don't want you here. That's what's happening right now. And that's not only bad for us as Catholics, because it not only violates our rights, but it means that the children of God that our Lord wants to reach through us, because of these legal obstacles, may not be reached. And that's very serious. The ultimate mission of the Christian, again, to get home to God and to bring everyone with you, as a friend of mine once said. Get home to God and bring everyone with you. You see this powerfully in a great film that I talk about a lot, the movie Harriet. It's a very Christian film, and it's about the life of Harriet Tubman. And it's based on a book, and there was a great NPR interview that that one of the makers of the film did. And Harriet Tubman gets out of, she was enslaved in Maryland, and they show it in the film. She prays to the Lord, essentially, and she said this, the Lord directed me how to get out. And so somehow miraculously, though she did not know where she was, she had no map, she literally walks into Pennsylvania, walks into freedom. But instead of staying in Pennsylvania, she goes back in. She goes back into the slave states, and she rescues her brothers and sisters. And there's a very powerful scene at the end of the film. She's the only woman to have, I believe the film said this, well, I don't know if it's actually true, but let's trust that she's the only woman to have led some type of combat regiment into battle still. And she leads this formation of soldiers into some area where they know that there is slaves that are running for their freedom. And you see the Union soldiers arrive, you see their guns out, and you see the slaves running. And so this is exactly what we are called as Catholics to do. Instead of staying in our freedom, and just being safe and secure, we're called to go back out, to rescue our brothers and sisters, to attack the gates of hell, and to rescue our brothers and sisters out. And so when we see the loss of our legal right to religious freedom, it is really a loss of our legal ability to evangelize, our legal ability to love and to heal other people, to be God's instruments. And if we fail to do that, souls will be lost. Nothing's more important. Those are the two most important things. Get home to God, bring others with you. That's it.
Well, that's a moving story of Harriet Tubman. And I think it's a great example of how Christians, in recognizing their love, how God has loved them and how then they can love others, may at times be socially disruptive, right? And yet,
very much so.
And yet really accomplish something, really offer kind of the healing hand of love and hope.
That's right.
To one another, and it certainly seems that, they're anyway, I just think that's such a powerful.
It is powerful to me because I think that, I've been rescued by God, right? From myself and from the world and all of those things, right? And it is in the spirit of the age in our country and in much of the West is so nasty and ugly. The fears about being canceled for being a Christian, the fears about standing up for life or religious freedom or the biological scientific reality of the in-person, they're massive. And so it's just easier. Well, I'm just going to stay in my freedom. I've escaped. I'm in the North. This is Harriet Tubman. I'm escaped. I'm in the North. I'm free. Those folks back there that are enslaved, that are in bondage, I wish I could help them out, but I just don't want to risk it. But the call of the Christian to go back into these uncomfortable, challenging, and dangerous places, that's what Christ did. That's what the apostle did. That's a vocation of every single Christian, and it's the most important work. And so that's what we're trying to. And the other thing too is we're talking about religious freedom in this way because it's not about tribe. That's a really massive challenge for Catholics in the United States, for Christian United States. Our faith is attacked. Our beliefs about the reality of human sexuality and the unborn and the sanctity of life, it's constantly being attacked in the media, in the culture, all the time, all day, every day. And we were talking about this with the students at lunch earlier. The temptation is to attack back. I'm just a Christian, right? I'm just a Christian. I'm just a Catholic. But you hear this thought, well, let's, on Twitter, there's this idea of let's own this political camp, or I'm going to own these guys or whatever. Oh, you got to own, that's not how Christians speak or act. It's not a tribe. Yes, we'll defend the truth. But we're not here to just defend simply our own camp or our own tribe, because the reality is, on a certain level, everyone's part of our tribe. Everyone's part of our community. Literally every man, woman, child's part of our camp. And so that's a very different way of looking at things. But it's very challenging, particularly when there's so much anger. And a lot of the anger is just. A lot of the anger we have as Catholics today about what's going on in the world is very just. But we should be angry at the evil, not the person.
All right, well, thank you.
You're listening to the Catholic Theology Show, presented by Ave Maria University. If you'd like to support our mission, we invite you to prayerfully consider joining our Annunciation Circle, a monthly giving program aimed at supporting our staff, faculty, and Catholic faith formation. You can visit us at avemaria.edu to learn more. Thank you for your continued support, and now let's get back to the show.
I appreciate hearing so many of your insights about religious liberty and the importance of the Catholic healthcare system, not only as really probably one of the largest healthcare provider networks, across the globe.
Right. That's right.
But also just part of the essential mission of being a Christian includes the ability to share that with others. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, how did you get interested in, all these, the legal battles, the health stuff, your own faith?
Sure. Thank God, because of a great mother and great family, had an awareness of the beauty and awesomeness of God. And what little I've understood about particularly when you're teaching children, they see God as initially the faith journey. He's big, he's awesome,
Yeah.
And so I had that sense of it, and some sense of a supernatural presence. My father passed away in a car crash, a car accident, however you want to phrase it, when I was very young. And so that gave me an awareness, a more potent awareness of God's providential care for me, because my father's not there. You see this with serious sinner that I am, not comparing myself to John Paul II, but you see this with John Paul II. He loses, famously now, his mother, his father, his brother, and not that long of a period of time. But who comes in a deep way to father him, to mother him? The Blessed Mother, and obviously God the Father. And so from this cross that he has, he experiences over time painfully this resurrection. From this desert, he experiences glory and joy. I'm a big fan. I talk probably way too much, and he's a bit of he's a close acquaintance, at least I could say. Dr. Schutz in his work talks a lot about the beauty of how God turns, and this is me now talking. A friend of mine said this to me. The Roman Empire is this place of great persecution for the church, and the Lord transforms this into this place of the Roman Empire into the mechanism for delivery of the gospel. The cross is meant to crucify, but it resurrects. So that's what I experienced in my life with the loss of my father over time. This just providential care, the sense that God's there, a fairly strong gift of faith. Of, okay, God's real, never really doubting it. Some, wondering, but never really doubting.
What a blessing.
Yeah.
That's amazing that you were able to receive such a really, horrible loss as a young child, as a blessing. And
over time. Over time. And I had a mother who is amazing, and she was fierce about the faith and kind of force fed it to us, and whatever. And that was great to a point. My faith became my own in high school, college, and law school. Very much living a party life, a scoundrel, a pagan, not in a state of grace for most of my teens and most of my 20s, or at least my very early 20s. And through doing it my way literally brought me to my knees of total desperation, because that wasn't working over and over again, not working, and recognizing time and time again, the one thing that's constant is God. The one thing I can trust is God. The one thing I really want is God. And I cannot, and experiencing the emptiness of pursuing prideful ambition, pursuing power, pursuing influence, pursuing personal gain, the temptation to want to make oneself one's own God or a God to others, right? And seeing how empty, and there's no joy there.
I heard someone describe it one time that God sometimes reveals himself to us through the gift of desperation.
Right. Oh,
G-O-D,
100%.
the gift of desperation. Was there anything in particular during that time, or particular people, or or a book that somehow?
No, so many things, and being respectful of our time here, but I think the loss of a relationship that was not virtuous, of a dating relationship when I was in law school, and I had made this relationship, and maybe, I made the relationship and some things connected with it, false idols. So the false idol breaks, and then I realized, okay, there's one God. As I got older, I recognized I hadn't dealt with the loss of my father fully. I just hadn't really dealt with it. It was kind of the thing, this is part of my story. It's no big deal. I'm fine. And there's a deep pain that can happen when a father or a mother is either physically not present because of death, or they left, or if they're not even emotionally present. We see this a lot with a lot of baby boomers. Sons get back, or, these sons get back from war, they get married, these World War II guys who did a lot of good in Europe, but also saw a lot of horrible stuff, participated in a lot of tough stuff. And they were emotionally absent to their kids. And that's really tough stuff. And God came in starting about 10, 12 years ago and said, you know what? No. I really am your father. I really am the man behind you. You have everything from me. I am giving you this divine inheritance, this divine royalty, and you can be safe, you can be secure, you can be at peace in my heart, in my arms. This is all you have to be. You can rest here. Interior Freedom by Father Jacques Philippe was a huge part of that.
Wow.
A book by John Eldridge, Wild at Heart. It's pretty popular.
Yeah, those are great books.
Really remarkable. Unbound, I read some years later by Neil Lozano. And a book that we actually took my team with at Christ Medicus through, and we're taking the whole Christ Medicus community through. We have a Catholic health community where people are sharing their medical costs, and we're also providing them with Catholic health coaching, spiritual direction, and a spiritual health program, largely based on Be Healed. But the work that Dr. Schutz is doing, the John Paul II Healing Center, Be Healed is a truly transformative book about just encountering the Father in one's own story and being liberated to be on mission, not to go inward, but to go further outward, to be that instrument of the gospel for other people. So those have all had a massive impact on me. And in terms of my thinking, I think Cardinal Sarah the last couple of years has had a big impact, maybe Cardinal Mueller as well, their writings and all of that. So, but it's because, the Lord has rescued me from my stupidity. I deserve death, but he gives me a chance at life. So, yeah.
Yes. Well, that's pretty amazing. So tell me a little bit about, you hinted a little bit at some of the work that you're doing with the Christ Medicus,
right?
But just tell us a little bit about that. What does the title mean? What's some of the work that you're doing? You talked about trying to share costs. All these different things.
Yeah. So Christ is the divine physician, right? So that's where we essentially get our name, Christ Medicus. He's the divine physician for all people, all times, all seasons. I love talking about that. I could talk about this all day, all night, because it's just great. And so our mission is to share the love of God in healthcare. And we do that in three ways. The first way is we defend our religious liberty and medical conscience through education, through some advocacy at the federal level and at the state level across the country. The second thing we do is we advise Catholic pro-life medical centers that provide care to particularly at-risk pregnant women and their unborn children. The third thing is this Catholic health community that we're building called Curo. We have families in 40 states that are part of this Catholic healthcare community. They share their health cost, and then we are providing them programs to help them grow in their whole health and wellness, so that they may live life fully alive in Christ. So yes, we're going to help you, and we partner with a Protestant group to do this. We help folks pay for their medical cost, but then we've created programs through our remarkable team to help our members live in the truth of who God has created them to be. So many of the physical health challenges are related to behavioral health, some trauma, some lies, some challenge, some sin, whatever. And so having a Catholic health coach can help get rid of those lies that might be impeding somebody from living a more healthy lifestyle in their diet and their exercise. A spiritual director obviously helps you live into the truth of what Christ is speaking to you. And the spiritual help program that we're doing, again, building off of the work of Dr. Schutz and Be Healed, is helping people to go in and to and understand where Christ was in the challenges of their lives, and then to become who they are, as Jacques Philippe talks about, to become who they are in their vocations and as mothers and fathers and spouses, and to live in the freedom that God has created them to live in as sons and daughters, as mothers and fathers, and whatever their vocations are. So I was at the Knapp Institute a couple of weeks ago, and I told a gentleman there, we were having a bit of an impromptu meeting. I said, if you join our ministry and you participate in the programs that we're providing our membership, not just the sharing the medical costs, but living a life fully alive in Christ through these programs, the health coaching, the direction, the spiritual health program, because of God's grace and love and mercy, I believe your life would be transformed. I really believe that.
Yeah.
I'm not just like, I really believe that. And we got a wonderful, if I could say one last thing, I don't know if I have time, but we got an amazing letter from a deacon in the Diocese of Anchorage, Alaska, about how direction transformed his vocation as a deacon. He was really struggling with whether to move forward, and receiving direction remotely from his spiritual director, Michael Vaca, who's a lawyer, Ave Maria law grad, and a bioethicist, and just has an amazing prophetic gift, transformed his vocation. And we're seeing how a lot of families, our health coach, Rebecca now Wilson, she's amazing, is working with a lot of some families that are in our ministry and just helping them live in the truth of God's love. And that has so many dimensions.
It's interesting that you're describing that, because I think a lot of hospital work today is realizing that, it's great to fix the car when the car gets in an accident.
Right. It's vital.
To fix it.
Yeah.
But it's even better to keep the car like preventative maintenance. There's so much more emphasis on wellness, emphasis on everything's like blue zones, eating. There's even in the secular community, you see much more emphasis on this. And so to be able to take that all the way, not only in terms of eating and in terms of exercising, but in terms of maybe dealing with unhealthy habits.
No, that's right.
I need help. I know that I should exercise, but maybe I'm struggling to do it. I know that I should quit this addiction, but I'm struggling to do it. And merely having a doctor tell you that's unhealthy, it's like, no, you need to get support.
That's right.
And you're providing
that. And it's a community.
Support.
It's one of the biggest determinants of health is community. And I heard a story of a person who went to Lourdes. I'm blessed to be a Knight of Malta. I haven't gone to Lourdes yet.
Oh, okay.
And this person's healing, it was actually probably a person telling the story that they had heard. So to be clear, but it was because they were simply accompanied. There's such power in that. And particularly after 3 years of being stripped of being with God in community, in physical community, being stripped of family, being stripped of friends, in terms of just the ability to get together, people need community. And so imperfectly, God is using us to do that. And I couldn't be more excited about the work.
And so it would seem also that what you're doing, because it has some of these online, there's such a crisis of healthcare in the U.S., where healthcare in the U.S. is so concentrated in major cities, but in many rural areas and in just many states even, there's not a lot of often healthcare. The whole rural health initiatives are so important. And it seems like your work is also addressing that. Am I correct?
Right. That's right. Because we can do it virtually. Now, there's no substitute for in-person. Yeah. There's no substitute for that. But it pains me in my heart, depths of my heart, the power of a good Catholic psychologist. I venture to say most of the young folks I know, which is people under the age of 60.
Yes. Count me in.
Are going to counseling, and it's okay. Life isn't perfect and we go through stuff and we need help, but the power of a great Catholic psychologist. But from what I can tell, for most people, they cannot afford to have a solid Catholic psychologist. So my hope and dream is one day that we could provide that. But for now, we're providing that virtual community and and praying for people, and sometimes fasting for them. And that awareness and that experience that I am loved, that someone else cares about me, that's a small seed that can transform the person. And so that's what we're working on doing. Not perfectly, but I'm excited about it, and we're helping people, and that's beautiful.
That's an inspiring, it's a really inspiring initiative, and it's so wonderful to hear about it. And that with respect to the health costs, but then also dealing with body,
Yeah.
kind of our psyche
Right.
and our spirit, because
Right.
we're ultimately one.
Right, exactly.
I think it was Viktor Frankl who wrote Man's Search for Meaning.
Right.
But he says, quoting Nietzsche actually, but a man who has a why can endure anyhow. But if we don't have a why, we can't endure anyhow.
Right.
I mean, that's
right.
the downside. And
Right.
that he would sometimes say that sometimes what people were struggling with when they would come to him as a psychologist was not properly like a mental health issue. What they were dealing with was an existential.
Sure.
And he described that, and he said it was prevalent in the US, even more prevalent than he saw in Europe after the war. He called it an existential vacuum.
Wow.
And a loss of meaning, then it's hard to organize your psyche and it's hard
Right.
to organize your body. So your psyche and your body fall into unhealthy habits, behavioral problems,
Right.
and so all those different things. And it's not that those things can't be dealt with by doctors, but
Right.
sometimes they also need to be dealt with by maybe life coaches, spiritual coaches, where
Right.
you begin to find a meaning and
Right.
purpose.
Right.
So to have one program that
Yes.
would somehow integrate all of these different things. And ironically, it reminds me that it almost sounds like what the Catholic hospitals used to be.
Right. Right.
When they were founded,
Right.
where you'd have the religious
Yes.
sisters there, the priests, you'd have the chapel,
Yes.
and you'd get communion and confession,
Right.
And if you need it, via last rites.
And
But
that's
it's
it.
like
That's it. That's the encounter with Christ. And I think that's part of our dream. And we have this virtual community, which is outstanding. But we are working with existing Christ-centered Catholic entities that are increasingly providing that integrated encounter with Christ with what you say. Like you go in, you can, I don't want to say get fixed up because that's not the right way to think about it, but you get the whole thing. You can whole person health, but just touching the Lord, So Bella Health and Wellness, I talk a lot about them all the time. I'm blessed to be on the board along with one of the members of the community here in Ave. Best primary care in Colorado, in my opinion. And you go in there, they have the Blessed Sacrament in a beautiful chapel. It has a spa-like environment. You have the wealthiest of the larger Denver metro community going there. You also have some very poor folks that are going there, and you don't want to leave. You get great care. You get great medicine. You also get prayed with. You encounter God in the natural and the supernatural in every phase of what's happening at Bella. Again, nothing's perfect, but it's outstanding. And we see other hospitals, the Sisters of Perpetual Adoration of St. Francis. It took me a long time to be able to say that. It's a mouthful, but they run 13 hospitals in the Midwest, and they're doing a very good job with the big system of reclaiming the mission of Christ that is Catholic healthcare. Yeah. So there's some great stories.
And it's not
too.
merely imposing on the Catholic mission. It's just like we want to teach the human person. You want to heal the human person, body, soul, spirit.
Right.
And when that begins to happen,
right.
It's beautiful.
It's attractive. Yeah. And if we have time for one, maybe I could say one last thing, but I'm a huge fan of, if I can think of it, I can send to him. But Jonathan Reyes, I can't imagine you don't know Jonathan Reyes. He was a professor at Christendom College, and he spoke to a group of focus students at one of the SIGs a couple of years ago. And he said, Christ is the reality. We're not imposing him. He's the reality. And I think our challenge in part is to live a life that reflects his love so that the magnitude of the attractiveness of God is also attractive to other people through our witness. And so I think that increasingly a lot of our allies in healthcare and Catholic healthcare and pro-life care are doing that. God designed the body. And so he's got all the answers, even in science and medicine. And so whether it's with Christ Medicus and the work we're doing with our Curo Catholic health community or some of our allies is tough as things are, and I'm going to talk about that later today on campus. There's a lot of beautiful things that just weren't happening 20 years ago.
Okay.
So,
before we shift to our kind of closing segment and a few specific questions I want to ask you there, I do, we spend a lot of time obviously around, teaching young people here at the university, and it's my joy to work with them. What would you say to young people who are thinking of going into law, as you did, or medicine, which you're now working with. And I think so many students are interested in these areas. What would you say to, a young Christian, a young Catholic who wants to, go into medicine or law?
I think particularly if they're an undergraduate, or even in high school, but if particularly to undergraduate students, the formation of the mind and the heart is absolutely vital. And obviously the heart can be understood on a certain level as the measure of the full person. But given how fragile human beings are, we need the formation of the mind so that we can intellectually know the truth. But we also need the formation of the heart so that our emotions can be anchored in the truth. And the complexity of the questions in law and in medicine and bioethics are so enormous that to be successful and fruitful and loving, it requires that formation of the heart and the mind. And what an opportunity to be able to do that as an undergraduate at a place like Ave Maria University. And so now is the time to do that. Theological, philosophical formation right now can pay massive dividends, and on a certain level is more important than most of what you'll get the first couple years of medical school and law school. You need to know the basics, but the questions that our young folks are encountering once they become doctors or once they become lawyers or nurses are so complex and so susceptible to deception that formation before you get into graduate school, I think, is in a certain level more important.
Yeah, the way you're describing that reminds me of this idea sometimes that medicine can ask questions that medicine can't answer.
That's true.
Right. And in any field, we ask questions on those larger questions, right? What are we? Where are we going? How are we living? These are these important elements.
Maybe can I lean into that a little bit?
Yeah.
Real quick. I don't know if this is going to be a little controversial, but I think it's a little easier. A year from now, you have to be careful, but I'll say this. Part of what you're talking about, we went through COVID. I'm not going to go too deep into it. But we made the mistake, much of the church made the mistake of in word and in deed showing that we cared more about the body than the soul. And that was dangerous, and we can't do that again. Father Roger Landry wrote a very courageous article in the National Catholic Register saying exactly that. And, but it shows that we have to have this integrated formation. Life doesn't happen in a vacuum. And so the work that you're doing and here at Ave in theology, the work that folks are doing in philosophy, how that comes together with science and bioethics, these things can't be handled in a vacuum because, I believe as much as I want to live a long life, my soul's more important. And so, so that's what you said is exactly right. And we have probably felt it more than ever as a country than, science is important. Can't explain everything.
Yeah. So I'd like to close with just kind of three quick questions for you. What's a book you've been reading lately?
I've been reading 2. Actually, I'll give you 3. Can I do that?
You could. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, sure. So, Bill Barr came out with his memoirs, and it's called I'm forgetting the name.
William Barr's memoirs. For now.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. That's right. I'm also reading, Solzhenitsyn's memoirs. I think it's called Between Two Millstones that Notre Dame published back in 2018 or 2019. I've started to be Restored by Dr. Schutz, my second book of his that I'm reading. And the Bill Barr memoirs are interesting. It's got a funny title that I was debating whether or not to say to say the title, but But Solzhenitsyn's really good. He's a real man for our time. And it's called, again, Between Two Millstones, Volume 1, Volume 2. I think it's Notre Dame University Press.
Yeah, his writings was really one of the first that really kind of exposed a lot of the horrors of the Soviet Union and the Gulag archipelago, the prison systems.
Right.
And when he was first doing that, people were still often thinking like, hey, this is a good way of running a society.
Yeah.
And he was one of the
exposed
people.
It. Right.
And then when he came to the US and spoke at Harvard, he had quite a challenging word that he said the West was, losing its soul too. So
right. No, and I think we see that now.
Powerful.
He's prophetic.
Yeah.
The Bill Barr book, I just came to mind, one damn thing after another.
That's great.
Yeah.
So secondly, what's one thing you do every day, or at least try to do every day, that helps you to find meaning and draw closer to God?
Yeah. I love to run in the macro sense. Day to day, I mean, most days you're like, oh my gosh, why am I doing this? But I try to run close to 3 miles a day, 3 to 4 days a week. And when I'm not pressed for time and I have just freedom to just kind of go, and I've gotten good sleep, it's just great. I really love to run. And paired with Lord of the Rings, probably on a day-to-day basis, something related to Lord of the Rings and running are some of the greatest, and coffee are like the things that like I could go without alcohol for the rest of my life. I don't think I could go without coffee. So coffee, Lord of the Rings, and running are some of the greatest joys of my day-to-day life.
That's awesome. Yeah. And last question, what's one falsehood that you believed about God at some point, and that some truth that you discovered that has changed your life?
God doesn't really care about me, so I need to take it into my own hands. And the truth is, I just need to trust. I need to depend on him. I need to give it all over to him. And so, we should never try to take things into our own hands. It's always a call to trust. Yeah. So that's been post reversion. That's been the biggest lesson.
That's beautifully put. So for listeners who might be interested in some of the things that you have shared today, how would you direct them to find more about the Christ Medicus Foundation and other programs?
Sure. Yeah. 2 websites. We got Christ Medicus, ChristMedicus.org, ChristMedicus.org, and then CMF Curo, CMFCuro.com.
Great. Well, thank you very much for being on our show.
Great to be with you. Love the questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this podcast. If you like this episode, please rate and review it on your favorite podcast app to help others find the show. And if you want to take the next step, please consider joining our Annunciation Circle so we can continue to bring you more free content. We'll see you next time on the Catholic Theology Show.